Chris Biderman, live in Minneapolis with us here. We were just talking road trips and cities there during the commercial break, man. Happy that you're with us. I asked your partner over on the Candlestick Chronicles, Kyle Matson, about this earlier. I'll ask you, what's your concern level on a scale from 1 to 10 with Sacramento and how this season may turn out for them?
I think it's relatively concerning. You look at all of the teams that, there's that bunch of teams that are in that sort of 5 through 8 spots in the West, and they're all separated by what, 2 or 3 games. The Kings over the last 10 are 4-6, and among that group, that's the worst record. So I think it's fair. Look, to be concerned because you got De'Aaron Fox banged up. He's been banged up for a significant portion of the season now, whether it was his ankle early on in the year, his shoulder sort of midway through the year. He talked about needing some time during the All-Star break to get that shoulder healed, and now he's dealing with the knee issue, and we'll see if he plays tonight. I saw him at shoot around. I wouldn't say it looked promising, but it's kind of tough to judge De'Aaron's gait because he's kind of got that old man run to him anyway, even when he is fully healthy. But yeah, so I don't know if he's going to play again tonight, but obviously, if you don't have him against Minnesota after what we saw Wednesday against Denver, that's pretty concerning. So, for the Warriors, for the Kings, like, you really want to avoid being in the play-in. You don't want to get LeBron James or Steph Curry potentially in a one-game scenario. So it's a tough stretch, and it's another tough game tonight. So I think it's fair to be reasonably concerned, but we know this team can play as well as anybody in the league on any given night. It's just the inconsistencies that have been sort of costing them and have been the story throughout the season. So
We have a frozen Biderman. Oh man, and how fitting. He's in the Twin Cities and he's froze. Oh, and you know the rules. We got to leave Biderman up on the screen, man. My man just froze everything, and he froze in 4K.
Yeah.
Like
it
James
didn't get all pixely.
Yeah, James is going to be on dial-up for like 45 minutes later on and not freeze.
It's a solid freeze right here too. Looking out the Minnesota windows out there, probably looking at nice weather.
Yeah, probably looking at Prince's house. Like, who knows? And yeah, just a tough look as our man froze here. And I have a follow-up for him because he said not sure whether it really looked promising, but it's hard to tell with De'Aaron at shoot around. I'm curious, like, well, what did it look like the other day?
Yeah,
because when Biderman said he was a full go at
warm-ups, and
I thought, oh, he's good. Biderman is thawed out. He's back with us. I had just told the guys, but you said you weren't really may not really be promising for De'Aaron. What did you think when you saw him the other night in Denver? Because when you tweeted that he was a full participant, we were on the air. I was like, oh, he gonna play. And so I was really surprised when you reported later on that he didn't or wouldn't.
Yeah, it's hard to say. Like like I said, he's kind of got that old man gait to him even when he's healthy. So he's kind of got that herky jerky. But he didn't look great at shoot around today. And it's kind of similar. Like you said, he was a full participant Wednesday and then ended up not playing. And that was decided, I don't know, roughly an hour before the game on Wednesday. So I haven't gotten to talk to him yet. I tried to talk to him at shoot around. That didn't happen. So we'll find out again today. But I didn't think he looked great today. Just being honest, but maybe he feels better. Maybe he doesn't. I'll talk to him before the game today, hopefully, and get a better feel for it. But yeah, I'm not sure. We'll find out.
Did you think on Wednesday that the Kings had a chance to win before that game without De'Aaron Fox? Because I asked that because a lot of people seem to be like they're just like, oh man, Wednesday was so alarming or whatever. Like this is super concerning. And if you ask probably everybody before the game, like, hey, Fox isn't playing, you think they're going to win? They'd probably say no. So, like, what was it? The fact that they were leading and they lost the lead so quick and then they got blown out, that was alarming. I don't know. I think me and Damian were the only ones that just kind of came away from that saying it was just a loss. You move on to the next game. Everybody else seemed to think it was a reprimandum on what this team is going to do for the rest of the season. Did you feel that way?
No, I didn't, because I thought the Nuggets played really, really well. And you look at the stretch that they've been on recently, since the Kings went to Denver and beat them in the last game before the All-Star break. They've been the best team in basketball and look like they're in championship form. And frankly, that looked like championship type basketball that they played against Sacramento in the second and third quarters of that game. And it also happened to come when De'Aaron Fox was sidelined. So if you're wondering whether or not the Kings can beat the Nuggets in a playoff series, then I think it was alarming, just given how good the Nuggets are. It's less about the Kings. But after the game, there were pretty clear signs of frustration in the locker room, and I wrote about it a little bit for the B. Like Kevin Huerter had mentioned, I asked him about the second and third quarter and what went wrong, and he said, I wish I was out there more. And Kevin is usually pretty measured in what he says, and it was, I haven't had a chance to follow up with him yet, but it was an admission that he wasn't exactly happy with his minutes in that scenario. And I've talked to him earlier in the year, and he said, this year is a roller coaster, and obviously his numbers have been inconsistent. He lost his starting spot. I think it was late December through 5 games in early January. He's obviously been mentioned in trade rumors. And then, I talked to Domantas Sabonis on Wednesday after the game, and he said he didn't think they had good coverages. And he didn't really elaborate defensively. He didn't really elaborate on whether or not that was a coaching thing or an execution thing. But the guys were pretty frustrated with how it went. It wasn't one of those, we were shorthanded against the defending champs. That was kind of to be expected. There was a lot of frustration in that locker room, I thought, and I'm curious to follow up with the guys on it today. But that to me, like, we've seen the Kings, the vibes have been good, right? Like, since Mike Brown has gotten here, the vibes have been overwhelmingly positive throughout the vast majority of his year and a half here. But I wonder if things don't go their way down the stretch here, if that's going to be something to worry about from a locker room perspective, or if this team has enough, physical or emotional resolve to handle something like that.
I can't front. That gives me a little of confidence is the word. I that makes me feel a little good about tonight's game.
That
the
they
fact,
didn't just
like,
it's just another game. They were kind of pissed off
the fact that they and Domas kind of said something post game. He talked about the guys being measured. Of course, he said it to you about we could have done a little bit better with our game plans for some of their key guys, indicating like this whole thing was off a little bit against Denver the other night. And we could talk about the Kevin Huerter stuff in a minute, but given the fact that those guys were really upset following that game, that actually gives me a little confidence that they know they know that this is another really tall task ahead of them, and they're not willing to lie down for it just because Minnesota's the top or a top team in the Western Conference.
Yeah, because I think that's a good point. And you look at some of the disappointing losses that they've had. When they lose to, like Detroit, like obviously they're frustrated, but it never really felt it's kind of been like, oh, it's one of 82, right? These things happen. It's the NBA. You got to play well against everybody. There hasn't been a feeling that this team, at least from my perspective, that this team is like really upset about any of those losses that they've had. And I do think if you wanted to sort of spin it positively, you could say, all right, it's good to see them being emotional about losing at this point, because I think I don't know if it's a leadership thing. Like, De'Aaron Fox is not an overly emotional dude. I mean, we see him get emotional on the court now and again, but like when he's talking to us in the locker room, he's definitely not the type who gets overly emotional or who reacts too high or too low one way or another. And that I think the Kings overall, the team kind of reflects that. And I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but I think for them to show emotion after losing is a little bit of a change. And to your point, probably a positive one, because they have around the same record that they had last year. Obviously last year went a lot better for them given where they were in the standings, but now, they're really fighting for their lives in terms of trying to get a top 6 seed and avoiding the play-in. So I do think you can make a case that it's good for them to feel emotional after losing a game like they did Wednesday against Denver, because these games really matter. This is a really important stretch. Obviously, those are important opponents in the Western Conference to play, and given that these other teams that they're grouped up with are starting to play better, including the teams behind them in the Lakers and the Warriors, who are in those nice 9th and 10th spots. It's a really important time for them to get it together.
Hey, Chris, the schedule is the schedule. It is what it is. But I've said for a while now, I don't think enough maybe has been made about what the Kings have had to deal with the last 2 months, the way the schedule is broken for them. Not a lot of home games, a lot of long road trips. When they get home, it's usually like they came off a 7-game road trip. They're home for 2 games, and then they got to go out for another 3 or 4 games. And it's going to balance out a little bit here in March. And I think that is going to be the time to make the move. If I was plotting this out a little bit, like, hey, keep your head above water in that tough January and February, because it gets a little murky, not home a lot or whatever. Keep your head above water. Put yourself in position to really make that run in March when I think 15 of their last 24 games are at home, I think it is. And that's where they're at. That's what they've done. People may not like it. I don't like it. But, hey, you kept your head above water, and now you got to the point where you're in a situation where I don't want to say control your own destiny, but you do in these final games with a lot of home games coming up.
Yeah, I would agree. Like you look at the January and February schedule, I think it was a 5-game road trip with 2 at home, and then they went out on the road for 7 more. And this trip, after this trip they're currently on, they only have 2 more trips where they play more than 1 road game on each trip, right? So they have 2 East Coast swings, and it's basically all West Coast road games or just home games for the rest of the way. So yeah, it's an opportunity for them, and it's an opportunity for them to play, I think, with more force at home. Like, they've let far too many teams, particularly bad teams or teams, missing their top guys, come onto their home floor and outplay them. And so having a stretch where you do have a lot of home games allows you to get into a rhythm, allows you to play with more force, and allows you to sort of solidify where you're going to be in the standings. To your point, I think it's a great one that, like, they have an opportunity, and they know that, like, regardless of how tonight goes, you have a winnable game on Monday against Chicago. You have a trip to play the Lakers, which is going to be a really important game, given that right now you're only separated by a game and a half, right? But yeah, they need to take advantage of what they have with the schedule. And I think one of the frustrating things about them for this season is that they haven't really done that. It doesn't feel like it, as loud as Golden One Center is, and as good as of an atmosphere as it is, it doesn't feel like teams are all that worried about coming in and playing there. And I think that's that speaks to just, I don't know, like the Kings have talked about it over and over again, that sometimes they feel like they can just kind of cruise to wins at home, and it'll come back to bite them. But they'll have an opportunity now with all these home games to get it right, and they're going to have to take advantage.
Chris, why do you think they haven't been able to take advantage of these moments this season? It feels like there's been a lot of ups and downs with Sacramento this year.
I think it's urgency. Like when they play, like I think about that Clipper game. What was it, Sunday, right? That felt like the most urgency that they've played with. And when I say urgency, how that manifests is like physicality on defense, getting out to 3-point shooters, not getting burned by dribblers to the lane where the defense has to collapse and then you leave shooters out open on the perimeter. I think it's just kind of an urgency thing. And I think the Kings know that they can score, but sometimes, and I think it's just in the back of their head that, we're going to go on a run here at some point. So, we're going to score at some point. And I think that just the league's too good to have that mindset. You just have to have that mindset where you have to bring it every minute you're on the floor of every game. And Mike Brown talked about it last year. Like, and I've said it to you guys a bunch of times, but I think it's probably the most important thing that Mike Brown said is that, It's easy to go from bad to good. It's really hard to go from good to great. And that's the battle the Kings are fighting right now, because going from good to great is about consistency. And he's talked about it with De'Aaron Fox. He's talked about it with his roster as a whole. It's just the consistency to play the defense with the intensity and the physicality game in and game out that you need to win games is really been this team's biggest issue. And I think it's kind of as simple as that. And I don't know what switch you have to flip to improve that. I think that's one of the more confounding things about this team is that, it's been talked about, the answer's in front of everybody, but they just haven't really done it on a consistent basis. And until they do, it feels like this is kind of going to be where they are as long as the Western Conference continues to be as formidable as it is.
Do you what do you feel about this team? Do you think they can get into that top 6?
I think they can.
See, I knew you were going to say that. Do you think they will get into the top?
So I think they will. I mean, if they're healthy, that's tough. I would need to do a dive on the rest of the schedule, but I mean, they should. Like they honestly should. De'Aaron Fox, I think Kevin Huerter, he went on the Point Forward podcast. I was watching that clip before I came on with you guys, saying that De'Aaron Fox is a top 3 point guard in the league. I agree with him. I think, what Domantas Sabonis brings them offensively is obviously, he's one of the most important offensive players in the league when you just look to the value to his team relative to, what the team does and what the team relies on. But can you get a consistent stretch from Keegan Murray where he's scoring 20 points a game for weeks on end, right? Can you get a consistent stretch from Malik Monk where, it's 15, 20 points nightly instead of, 25, 30 and then 6 the next night, right? Like there are just so many players outside of Fox just are kind of riding this roller coaster of a season, and you haven't gotten all of them sort of firing on all cylinders at once. And maybe that'll come. And if that comes, the Kings are a really, really hard team to beat. When they have the full, when you're getting Trey Lyles hitting 4 threes off the bench and Malik Monk scoring 20 points and running pick and rolls with Domas, and you're getting, double digits in the fourth quarter from Fox, like the Kings are just really, really difficult to beat no matter how they're playing defensively. But offensively, it's been a little bit uneven, and you have, I would say, 3, 4, 5 guys that you can point to that have kind of had roller coaster seasons offensively. And I think that's a serious issue in terms of how you look at them in terms of getting to the 6th seed. So right now, I would say, I would lean no, just because of how thick that grouping is in the West, that everyone they're contending with, and you have teams that have won playoff series, where the Kings are still trying to find their footing and do that this year. So, not to be like Debbie Downer, but it's hard given what I saw, and maybe my opinion's colored too much by, the Heat game on Monday and then the Denver game Wednesday. But for right now, I would say it's looking difficult, but if they go on a run where they win 5 straight games, maybe I change my mind.
You mentioned Keegan Murray there a minute ago. We talked quite a bit throughout the week about Keegan's second year. How would you evaluate? You've been covering this team for 2 years now. How would you evaluate Keegan Murray's second year?
You definitely see flashes of like growth in his game, growth and evolution in his game, right? Like last year, he was mostly used as a spot up shooter. And I think that's one of the transitions that the Kings have been making this year is they're relying on Keegan to be more of a secondary playmaker, to be a driver, to use a mid-range game. And the cost of that has kind of been to Kevin Huerter, right? Because Kevin Huerter was getting a lot of dribble handoff stuff, a lot of pick and rolls with Sabonis. And now Huerter is sort of the guy that is on the other end of Keegan Murray getting more opportunities on offense. And that's one of the transitions the Kings are going through overall. But I would say Keegan, it's the flashes have definitely been there. And his game is far more well-rounded offensively than it was. And I think that all goes back to Summer League. And that was the main talking point when Keegan was playing really well in Summer League for those 3 games, whatever it was. But I would say the consistency is the thing, right? Like when you don't have De'Aaron Fox Wednesday in Denver, you look at the first quarter and you say, oh, Keegan's aggressive. Like maybe if Keegan if Keegan scores 30 or 40 points here and is hot from three, like maybe the Kings can make this a game and make up for what they're missing without De'Aaron Fox. And then after the first quarter, it just kind of goes away. And so I think that's really the next big challenge for Keegan is how can he adjust when he's the focal point of a team's defense, right? Because Denver's a really, really good defensive team, and they don't really have any weaknesses defensively. We can talk about Jokic a little bit, but he's not the defensive liability he was earlier in his career. But when you're playing a really good team in a high leverage situation, can Keegan Murray be a go-to scorer? Because Mike Brown said it over and over again. That's what the Kings need to take that next step. And you see signs of it, but you haven't seen it. You haven't seen it for any extended period. And I think Keegan's. I'm optimistic about Keegan getting there. I just think maybe right now, when he's 22 years old, it might be tough to get that from him at this point in his career. But next year, the year after that, I could definitely see Keegan evolving into that secondary scorer that pushes the Kings to a different level. Because right now, even Sabonis scores plenty, but he's not a guy who can create his own offense when, De'Aaron Fox is taken out of a play or De'Aaron Fox isn't playing, right? So that's what the Kings need from Keegan. I think he's shown signs of his game evolving and improving, but it hasn't been there to the point that the Kings need it just yet.
Last question from me. Do you look at this situation with Kevin Huerter? And we've said a number of different times on here, they need Kevin Huerter to do what they want to do. Do you see the relationship or the up and down nature of playing time? And do you see that changing between Kevin and Mike Brown?
That's a good question. I think it starts defensively, right? Because it feels like whenever Kevin Huerter is taken out of a game and just kind of relegated to the bench, it's because Mike Brown is going to a better defensive option, whether it's Chris Duarte or Kessler Edwards even. So if Kevin Huerter improves his play defensively, that will allow him to get more opportunities to stay on the court, unlike Wednesday where he had a turnover, he missed a couple free throws. He didn't shoot the ball particularly well, and then was taken out with 8 minutes left in the third quarter and didn't go back into the game. And in part, obviously, Mike Brown emptied the bench in the fourth quarter, so that's obviously part of that. But it's tough. I think Huerter's had one of those difficult seasons where the expectations last year were so high, given how well he played in spurts and given how important his shooting was to the offense. And for him to kind of, I don't know if taking a back seat is the right way to put it, but to be on the other side of them saying to Keegan Murray, all right, you're going to take more offensive responsibility and Kevin's going to be more of the spot up shooter now. He's just a rhythm player and he's struggled to get in rhythm all year. And I think the trade deadline stuff and all the rumors and all the discussion, I think that got to him. And I haven't heard that specifically, but talking to Kevin and have him say this season's been a roller coaster for him emotionally, reading between the lines, that's kind of where my head goes, is that like you're part of, you see your offensive role get sort of limited after having a really good season last year. You're mentioned in all these trade rumors. They end up keeping you and not dealing you, but you're still going to be in all those trade rumors in the offseason, and he might see the writing on the wall long term potentially. But he's very much a rhythm player, and he's talked about how difficult it's been for him to get in a rhythm this year. And until that changes, and I think for him to get in a rhythm, he's going to have to improve defensively to get those opportunities to play in a rhythm, right? So that's where I think his focus needs to come, because he's the type of shooter who can get hot really at any moment. And if he really focuses on defense and plays well defensively, then Mike Brown might be willing to stick with him more, and then those shooting numbers could potentially come back up for him.
Real quick, the crazy thing about Mike Brown playing it that way is it almost never works.
Yeah.
Like you're like, oh, I'm going to teach him a lesson and go with a better defensive line. Yeah. You don't win, and it doesn't make Huerter better. So what are we really doing?
It's frustrating.
Yeah, that's fair, and it's definitely something. Mike Brown spoke last night before the players did, and obviously had I spoken to Huerter and then Mike Brown, I would have asked him about that, and I plan on asking him about it tonight and see. I'll see what he says. But yeah, it's been, I think when it comes to progression in the NBA, it's never quite linear, right? Like it's easy to look back and see the Kings be a 3 seed last year and just assume, all right, they're going to be better next year because they're a young team and they'll have, more time together. But the West got a lot better, and the Kings have had to deal with some injuries, whether it's Fox or and other things. Like it's just hard to continuously ride that same trajectory. And I think the Kings are learning that. And I think ultimately they'll be better for it long term. But right now, I think they're definitely in one of those difficult stretches.
To be fair to Huerter, it's perfectly okay to be frustrated. Like the season that he's had dating up to training camp and all of that stuff. Like it's, but we said, and I think our frustration lies with we said at the trade deadline, or excuse me, not the trade deadline, the All-Star break. One of the most important components to the rest of this stretch, Chris, is they've got to Mike and Kevin, whatever's going on or has been going on, those two need to get on the same page. Because like Casey, like we need Kevin Huerter to be a certain type of player for the Kings to get where they want to go. And now we're like 3 games into this. And Chris is right. The context is important. Like Mike didn't play anyone. He played Domas long enough to get a rebound. He didn't play anyone in the fourth quarter, but it felt like Huerter kind of was already out. And it's like, no, this is not we do not need this.
Well, one of the reasons why Malik Monk works with Mike Brown is because Malik will go right at Mike, right? Yeah. Like Malik will go at Mike, and they have enough respect to where, they might be yelling at each other during a game, but then they'll talk about it afterwards and hammer it out. And that dynamic is healthy. And if you talk to Malik about it, he'll say, yeah, I love Mike, but like, we'll yell at each other, but it's all good. I don't know that Kevin and Mike have that same rapport. And I don't know that Kevin's built that way. So, I don't know if maybe he should yell at Mike or if he should go at Mike the same way Malik does. I don't know that that's necessarily in his personality, but I think that's one of the stark differences between those two guys is Malik will go right back at you, where Kevin, might not take to the hard lessons in the same way.
Great stuff, Chris. We know you got a long night ahead, man. Thanks for carving out a pretty good amount of time with us, man. We really appreciate you, my friend.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry about this hotel Wi-Fi early on.
Oh, man, it was great. Just one little hiccup. Nice little reset. You're back in 4K, man. It was perfect.
Perfect, man. Well, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for having me.
Likewise. That's our man, Chris Biderman, right